Welcome to Bat Therapy, psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
All right, so Summer of Infamy, we're continuing, and I was really excited because we talked about it and we decided, hey, why don't we do an organization instead of a one person? And so we're going to be talking about Hydra today.
Yes. Yeah, I find the organizations very interesting, and there are so many interesting ones out there too. I mean, James Bond's got some interesting stuff out there.
Oh yeah, Spectre.
Yep. Spectre. DC's got stuff with like Legion of Doom, which is just one of many. And yeah, all of the organizations, they're definitely very interesting. And yeah, I always forget about Hydra. So I was glad you brought it up because it gave me an opportunity to kind of go back and rewatch some stuff.
Yeah, they're honestly, in my opinion, some of the best MCU movies. I think Captain America Winter Soldier might be, it's definitely in my top 3 as far as my favorite MCU movies go. And also like Hydra, like even though they're certainly super villainous, there's something fun about them. Like I think the big reveal that so many people we had seen on the side suddenly were just whispering "Hail Hydra" to each other. It was just
I will give you that. I will give you that. That I think that's one of the very compelling things about an organization is inevitably there's some sort of spy and espionage and all the cloak and dagger stuff. And so yeah, it was interesting to see these people where it's like, oh, this side character that just happened to pop up in a few movies. Oh my God. Yeah. So I will give you that. That's always really cool.
It was a lot. Yeah, it's great. And my friends here, we all have a drinking game that's always going on ever since those movies came out. So basically, if we whisper "Hail Hydra" to someone and no one else hears it, they have to take a sip of their drink. But if someone hears you say it, then you have to take a sip of yours. And it's been this game has been going on for like close to a decade now. Like we've just like, if you get somebody alone and you just say "Hail Hydra" and no one hears it, it's like, guess what? You gotta take a sip of your drink. Or
you just said that publicly on the podcast. So I think now
I know
there's so many people out there that if they ever meet you,
I know
it's game over for you, bro.
It's not though. It's not though, because I'm getting 2 things out of it. 1, I get to drink, and 2, they're listening to our podcast. So
okay, there you go.
Yeah, go ahead. Download as much as you want. I got the alcohol for it. It'll be fine. Please, if someone's like, "Oh man, you're gonna get 10,000 listens this month," I'm like, "Well, I guess I'm gonna be drinking 10,000 sips. It is what it is." Hail Hydra. I'm fine with that. Joke's on you.
So I think that's interesting though that you and some of your friends, and I was not included in this, but I won't take that personally.
You never visit, so yeah. It's not the same over the phone.
Okay, whatever. But still,
it's gotta be
I think you're actually hitting on something that is a key to organizations where there's a community, there's a connection, you have your people, and if there's a secret part to it, like a secret handshake or a saying, or things that you're doing that other people aren't aware of, that bonds you even closer to each other. It's kind of funny. So you guys are kind of playing out one of the reasons that I think these organizations can really be powerful, because it just like bonds people together.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like networking that happens whenever someone's in a fraternity. Like,
Mm,
oh, there's more job opportunities, or oh,
yeah.
I automatically have a few people that consider me a friend just because I'm a part
Yes.
of this. I mean, it was so funny in Avengers Endgame when Captain America is trying to get the Tesseract, and all he has to do is just go up and whisper, "Hell Hydra," and they're like, "Oh, yeah, sure, you can take the Tesseract, all yours, dude. You said the magic words." Like,
And that's the
which,
thing,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, it's so incredible how powerful that sort of thing can be, and I think fraternity, sorority kinda thing, that's another great example where, yeah, just something that creates this unity with other people, and there's this I don't wanna say higher power 'cause it's not always religious, and that feels like a religious tone, but there's this kind of higher entity, higher goal, higher purpose that
yeah,
pulls you all together. Even if it could even be something silly like, "Hey, there's not real Hydra, but we have this fun drinking game together." Even something like
yeah.
that can, the ties that bind us together.
And you know what's so interesting is if you're on the opposite end of that, it makes you feel one excluded and two
Mm,
like there's an entire part of this person that you don't know. Because I remember when
mhm.
like the reveal when I think it was the one of the agents that were in some of the Marvel shorts, he ended up being a Hydra agent. In Winter Soldier it was revealed he was a Hydra agent. I was like, damn it, I like that guy. Really? He's wow, betrayal. And it's so funny whenever that happens with people, like when something happens and you're like, well, that is completely out of character, and I thought I knew that person better than I
Mhm.
did. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, very interesting. Like one of the things I thought about when I was rewatching it, I'm like, I don't remember there being I couldn't remember if there were any women that were in Hydra. I'm like, is this a sexist organization? Oh my god! Like I was sitting there, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't like this at all.
Well, wouldn't surprise me to be
Right? Yeah,
to
considering
be quite frank, wouldn't
they
be
are
very
villains,
surprising.
right?
But yeah, well, and another surprising thing too is, man, that secret kept for a really long time.
Oh yeah,
So Hydra extends past Shield, but the I mean, part of Winter Soldier is how okay, so Shield, this United States kind of protective agency has actually from nearly, if not the very beginning, has Hydra agents secretly amongst them woven in and actually
yep,
working against S.H.I.E.L.D. within S.H.I.E.L.D. the whole time.
yep.
And I was like, wow, how do you? I mean, I don't know about you, but gossip flies around my workplace pretty quick. Like, how did they keep that secret for so long? That's impressive.
Honestly, there's a part of me that wonders how much of a secret it was because the thing is, and
Mm,
it's always really funny when things like this kind of mixes with actual history because it Hydra started way long before like I think even in the Marvel comics like that organization started like during ancient Egyptian times. Like they've been around
mm,
for a very very long time.
yeah.
And so it's really interesting because you look at World War II and Operation Paperclip was a very real thing, right? Where the United States was scared of Russia getting more information and top scientists. And so they went and they let all the really smart like Nazi scientists come to America
Mm,
and work. And that's how Shield got infiltrated because I think it was think it was Zola. He was
yeah.
in Operation Paperclip. He got pulled in by Tommy Lee Jones's character in the first Captain America and went to America and basically secretly between him and Von Strucker kept Hydra going and kept it alive just because they were like, oh, well, you're really smart. It'd be a shame to just kill you. Maybe, I mean, you're a smart enough Nazi. You can it's okay,
Yeah.
and it's never
So
okay, and
we
that's the
kill
thing.
you, we bring you in, or you work for our enemies.
Right. Right.
Yep.
And that's how it was able to not only stick around but spread. Just like,
Mm,
I mean, just and then I take like the American Civil War for example. It's like, yeah, the Union came back together, the Confederates came back, and they were part of the United States again. But then they also got to tell their own side of the story, and it kind of had a snowball effect where now
mm,
history books can say two different things about what happened. And it's all because sometimes you might not need to play so nice.
yeah. That is very interesting. I didn't know that specific operation um, had happened.
Yep.
But I mean, there definitely is something to be said for. I mean, we've talked about it on here time and time again. Things are not black and white, and
Mm-mm.
it's a very real decisions about, okay, so if you have these people who are high impact, we want that stuff on our side, we don't want it on the side of the people we're working against, which, there
Right.
there were people that were working together that knew they weren't going to be getting along once the war was over. They knew.
Right.
And so do we just kill people off, or do we try and take them before the other side gets to take them?
Right.
But yeah, it's a very interesting kind of thing. And how do you, I mean, organization, so Hydra is obviously it's an organization that was bringing on destruction purposefully for their own end result. But organizations in general, it's interesting to see, like, how do you try and draw people in? How do you try and make sure that you have the numbers, you have the members you want versus them going to some other organization?
Right. And and it kind of brings in how there is a flaw in that phrase, like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's like, no, if you're
Mm.
afraid of a bear and a rattlesnake is afraid of a bear, that doesn't mean the rattlesnake is your friend. Like, no, that's not how.
Well, does the rattlesnake bite the bear and then the bear goes away? Because then,
s-
maybe you're on the same side for a little while.
Then the
And
rattlesnake
then
bites
after
you.
that,
I was
yeah, then
this.
after,
It's the
yep. Then
after that.
after that,
That's the issue. Right? And that's what happened with Operation Paperclip. That's what happened with Zola and Hydra. They were like, "Oh yeah, you're super smart. You can come in." And he's like, "Okay, will do." And they never checked up on, "Oh, so you're still okay, so you're still part of Hydra. Okay. Oh wow, that's really bad." And they got all the way to the top levels. I mean, the World Security
yeah,
Council had Hydra members on it. That's horrible. That's
yep.
horrible, but you do see it happen. Like you see it happen in history where there were presidents that were probably members of like things like the Ku Klux Klan. And it's like, how does that happen? It's like,
Ugh.
well, people were okay with it at the time, and it just kind of got worse and worse because of that. And
I
so
think we
it's
also, though,
yeah.
we I think we can also just make assumptions that we know a person. I mean, you were even talking about, you watch a character and then they add this other layer to them and how betrayed you felt by this fictional
Yes.
character. So imagine being, someone else within that storyline. But I think I think a lot of times if we're around a person, especially if we're around them a good chunk of the time or whatnot, or we've seen certain things they've done, we kind of fill in the blanks about the rest of them. You make
Yeah.
assumptions. Okay, so if a person fits into these three categories, okay, I have a certain sense for them and I can guess other things about them
Right.
based on what I know. And there's a problem with that because not everyone's going to think to the extent of, okay, well, what kind of down and dirty terrible stuff might this person do? We don't always go there. Some people do. I
Right.
actually once had a roommate And he was always really good at picking up the not so great pieces of people and being able, and I was like, "Oh man, I really need to learn how to do that better." Because it's good to have a balanced view of people.
Yeah.
There's something to be said. Sometimes people don't have enough faith in other people, and sometimes they have too much. And
Right.
so, yeah, I think especially when it comes to this sort of thing, like, okay, um, you are you are at the height of your field and what you do to the point where you're able to join Shield. People, unless you're a spy, like, you're probably not going to necessarily think, "Oh, wait, screen them for Hydra." It
Yeah.
doesn't flow together in terms of what you think about that person, what traits they have. So that I think that's one thing that might kind of make sense too, is like you said, there were people that got woven in, and I think people assumed, "Oh, well, they're just surrounded by a bunch of people who serve the United States
Yeah.
military and are gonna
Good
therefore be
guys.
very loyal." And yeah, so they don't think about how, okay, well, over time, these 2 things might start getting woven together, and before you know it, you don't know which side a person's on. Do they serve SHIELD? Do they serve Hydra?
Right. And what's interesting too is the people in Hydra are still very charismatic. They still wanted to th- they definitely saw themselves as the good guys. Like, oh no, we're gonna
Mm,
save humanity from themselves, right? Like that was their attitude, but it was, oh yeah, we're just gonna kill a couple million people and
it was
everything will be great.
colonialism at its best
Right. We're just
slash
gonna take out a
worst.
couple million people and then it'll be great. And yeah, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be
Yeah.
fine. And that was their whole thing. And they were all bent on it. And one of the things they talked about was at one point when it came to Shield, Zola was the only one.
Mm,
But between when they let him in after World War II and when we get to Winter Soldier, it's a full network.
yeah.
It is a
Well,
full network.
think about it, because one of the things he said when he's kind of explaining all of this stuff is Hydra did not trust people to rule themselves.
Right.
Okay, so then you plop him in the middle of Shield as it's forming. So it's not its own fully formed organization in the way it is, once Captain America is thawed. So it's it's more youthful, versus Hydra is a much more solidified organization.
Mhm.
And Hydra believes you can't trust people to rule themselves. Um and so here you have him plopped. Okay, yes, he's in the middle of people who are serving their country, and you'd think there would be this disconnect. However, think about the timing. So
Yeah.
you just had World War II. So at the very least, you don't trust the Germans or the
Right.
Italians or the Japanese, right? There are certain people you don't trust to rule. And then you have the Cold War, so then you don't trust the Soviets. And so all of a sudden you see these things that it's like, well, actually, like, Hydra's kind of got a point. There are a lot of people
Right.
out there that you can't trust to rule themselves. And then Hydra's like, okay, well, how do we fix it? So here's what we tried before and it didn't work. People fought back. We got to be sneaky about it. And we gotta find ways to break people down, but they need to not know it's happening.
Yeah.
And so okay, we can't trust people, we get that. And also, we're kind of used to the tensions of war and everything going on.
It's
So
what
what
we
you're
do. Yeah.
saying, yeah. So, yeah, and yeah, we've been trained for this as well. Um, it peacetime is kind of a newer thing. So all of these things probably slowly started kind of blurring together where it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if I join Shield, Hydra just sounds like the next step forward.
Yeah.
And there you go. All of a sudden, Shield's got all sorts of Hydra swimming in there.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's just it's very interesting because even their motto is that they're always growing. Cut off one
Yeah.
head and two more take its place. Like they're like you said, that foundation is there where they're just like, we're always converting people. And so it's one of those things where in the back of my head, even if they're going around eliminating Hydra, I'm like, Hydra's still around. The same way that you still have evil organizations from in real life that are somehow
Mm,
still kicking now,
yeah.
because it's like one little set and it'll grow and it'll spread, and it's like a virus. It's like a virus that just
Mm,
infects, but it lays dormant until it needs to do something, but it keeps pushing the barriers to the point where, like you said, suddenly you're backing a cause that you never thought you would back before because
mm,
they
yeah.
slowly
Yeah. And
change.
and and it's interesting because it made me think back to last season when we talked about Superman, because inevitably, with alternate realities, okay, well, what if Superman like controlled the world? And it almost always came back to this thing of you have a superpowered person who is clearly different than everyone else. People are going to fight back. They see this entity taking something from them. And so Hydra tried to take over, and then they were seeing this kind of reaction happening. But the difference here is that you're an organization made up of a bunch of people. And
Right.
so, yes, there are people oftentimes within, these organizations like military and politics and whatnot, but still, and because of this, I think they have an easier time than, say, the Superman, um, timelines that we talked about, an easier time of shifting to something more subtle that grows underneath the surface and essentially tries to make it where people grow tired over time with how
Hmm.
the world is breaking, and so they're able to gradually take over.
Yeah.
um, that being said, though, now admittedly, I have not, because I think Hydra comes up a lot in like one of the Marvel shows, right?
Agents of Shield.
Yeah, so
It's agent
I
yeah,
have
Agents of Shield. I never got into it because I don't know. I just never like
there were just too
I've
many things.
it's not even that it was too many things. I've never liked those shows that are like adjacent to something I want to see. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, look, Iron Man was in that chair 5 minutes before you walked in." Right? Or, "Hey, we've seen this character before. He sat next to Thor at that one dinner table, and now he's on our show." Like, they always it was the same thing with Gotham. It's like, "Oh, look, it's it's Dick Grayson's grandfather. Isn't this cool?" And I'm like, "I don't whatever, I
Yeah.
guess." So like, yeah, and so I that's why I never got into
Yeah.
Agents of Shield because it always just like danced around what you really
Yeah.
wanted to see.
Yeah.
Like like Nick Fury was in like that first episode, and I'm like, yeah, he's the Agent of Shield. And then I never saw Samuel Jackson again. I was like, I don't want
Oh,
to
of
watch
course
this
not.
anymore. I'm mad. Right? It's like, yeah, it
Yeah,
was,
I
yeah.
think without that background, we maybe don't have everything, but Hydra definitely talks about, "Oh, well, we just want people, we can't trust them to rule themselves, and so blah 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 blah. We'll do it for you." But really all you see from Hydra is death and destruction. You never really I'm not Here's my thing. If you I I'm not necessarily arguing with the potential premise of, if people rule themselves, like, not everyone is best for leading people.
Mhm.
Right? Different people have their strengths and weaknesses. And I agree with the fact that we people get ourselves into a lot of murky situations. So I
Oh
don't
yeah.
necessarily disagree with that. But I unfortunately, not for everyone, but there's a good chunk of people who the personality traits that draw them towards saying, "Ah, I am the one to rule all the people. I can do it." a good chunk of them are probably the last people that you actually want
Oh yeah.
to
Oh
to be
yeah.
in charge.
It's kind of
And
yeah.
I and that's what I think Hydra is. It's like, yeah, you say that's what you want to do, but I'm kind of worried what it would look like if you were in charge.
Right. And that's the thing. And it's what is the phrase? Corrupt power corrupts absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that the
Yep.
phrase? Yeah.
Yes.
And because the thing is, like, I'll think about it sometimes, and I'm like, who sits around and says, you know what? I want to be president. Why? Why? Right? Like, who sits or like, why do you want to be president? Like, I'm already concerned that you even want to be.
Isn't that sad though?
It
Isn't that
is,
sad?
it is, but like, it's one of those things like, I'm disappointed, but not surprised. Like, not at this point, because even when like I look at things like school government, and it's like, oh yeah, let's vote for a class representative. I'm like, why do you want to be class representative so bad? As your science teacher, I really want to know, what do you have planned? Right? Like, why do you want this? And a lot of times it starts with, oh yeah, it'll look great on my resume. It'll look great on a college application. Or they just
It'll look great on
love
my
power.
resume for when I go to take
Yeah.
over the world.
Right.
Did we have those representatives at our high school? I don't remember
We
anything like
had
that.
student body.
Did we
Yeah, we
really?
had like student body presidents. They selected like prom themes and stuff like that. I don't know.
Hmm.
Like, but like it's. I mean, I don't.
I'm just kind
They're
of
not
surprised.
politicians now. I can guarantee you that. They didn't
You
move
don't know.
on
You don't
into
know.
politics after that. But like, like, but it's
That
not.
is
I'm
a good
not.
point though.
Yeah.
Yeah, are those the people to look out for? Like we should get a whole list of the people from back home that did the class representatives
Well,
and
it's just funny now. It's funny thinking about it now because back then stuff like that mattered. But I'm like, did someone really wait outside of band class with buttons saying to vote for them for student body? Like what? Like I have bills now. I'm concerned about insurance premiums. I cannot believe that that is something I ever cared about. Right? Like it's just it's always
Jeez.
really funny looking back on situations like that, but at the same time, like I was saying before, why do people want certain
Yeah.
positions? Because like for
Yeah.
it, like on a job, a lot of the times you want that position not because you want to run the company better, it's because
Mm.
it's more money.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
because it's more money. But things like politics, most of those people are millionaires already. Why do you want to also be a senator? Like, I'm very concerned. Like, what is it that you're trying to do that you can't already do?
Well, and I think that also is one of the things that can be very compelling about. So once again, so how did Hydra do this? How did it weave itself through and and take away so many seemingly loyal people to the United States?
Bucky,
Um,
Winter Soldier.
Bucky. Well, but I mean, him, it's like, okay, I get it. They
Right.
brainwashed him.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it. I get it. They experimented on him. They brainwashed. But all these other people were not. And therefore, were actually a lot more faithful. Yeah, okay, sure. Bucky killed a bunch of people for them as Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, he was fighting back in there
Yeah.
versus these other people who joined willingly. But once again, okay, especially the timing, if you hit at these pressure points in history where there's a lot of societal unrest or shifts or things that have happened. So you had World War II, and then you had the Cold War that you could see just around the corner. And then just in general, like you're talking about, Hydra was probably playing off of some of these similar things, ironically, because once again, who's choosing to lead these things? And you're like, well, can we trust Hydra? But you look at the political system within the United States, and a lot of people have been frustrated for generations.
Hmm.
None of what we're talking about is new stuff. And so here you have, okay, great. yeah, we can't trust people to rule themselves. We can't trust that the right people are going to be ending up in a place where they can be put into power with how things are. So, hail Hydra. And we've got to, you know, break it from the foundation. Yeah, it's very interesting stuff, and yeah, I'm with you. I really like the organizations and just seeing. I think there's also something about just seeing how an organization does things quietly and subtly, and
Oh
seeing
yeah.
how it's able to kind of manipulate things to its advantage. It's just a very interesting. It's a very interesting plot point when it's not my real life.
Yeah. Well, and also, well, it is our real life, but we don't have to talk about that. But
Yeah, that I do not find interesting, but it's interesting in
oh,
fiction.
but yeah, like, well, one thing that makes Hydra so fun too is they actually do a decent job getting along. Like with the Legion of Doom, all they do is fight. And the only reason they're there together is because they're like, maybe three of us can beat Batman. Like that's the only
Yeah.
reason they're there. Like it's
Or it's
not
like, I can't successfully rob this place on my own.
right.
So let's come together. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a hey, we have a passion and this is something we believe in and
Right.
we're trying to
Yeah.
change the
Well, and
world.
well, and I was reading up on Hydra too, and I didn't realize that at different periods of time, it was also kind of like religiously cult like
Mhm.
surround. Yeah, surround. Well, I'm forgetting.
Yeah, there was an
Is
alien. It was like an inhuman, especially well
Yeah, it was an inhuman. Yes,
In
yes, yes.
MCU's Hydra. Yeah, it all it was something with an inhuman, and I'm still not
It's something
really
weird. Like, yeah,
sure.
there was an
It was so
inhuman way back in the day. That inhuman became too powerful and was therefore banished from Earth. And so Hydra actually developed because people wanted Hydra back.
right.
And then it shifted into this more like let's take over the world stuff. But every now and then you had people kind of reconnecting to the almost like religious. It had almost like a religious context to it in a
Yeah.
way. Like people trying to go through portals and never surviving, trying to go see Hydra and stuff.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I always think is really funny with how they did it with the MCU because with the MCU it's like you don't really when you first see that first Captain America movie, you're not really sure like how long Hydra's been around. You just know that
Mm,
Red Skull is like their number one guy and
yep.
I laughed so hard the first time I watched Infinity War and Red Skull's just out there in the middle of nowhere guarding the Soul Stone. I was like, what the hell? What are you doing here? Like, I laughed so hard because I'm like, okay, he's been here this whole time. I want to know, did he learn anything? Or if they dropped him off on Earth, would he still be like, all right, back to Hydra, let's do it? Like, did he learn anything at all? And it's really funny the way that they did that because after Red Skull disappeared, you're like, oh, well, they lost their number one guy, so I guess they'll collapse. But they didn't, right?
Mm-mm.
They didn't. Like, if Lex Luthor got caught, Legion of Doom is going to break up. They're going to scatter.
Mm,
They're going to
yeah.
scatter. But
Yeah, yeah.
somehow, not only did Hydra survive, but their scientists who should have died off long ago somehow convinced them to put his brain into a bunch of like dot matrix printers. Like it was like like it was really that was really funny. But it was I couldn't
Can
believe
So one
that.
of my favorite lines actually, just real quick, in that movie was um I think so they find him in the computer and they think he's a recording. And it's like, what's with this German recording? And he's like, it's something like two corrections. First off, I'm Swiss. I was like,
Oh,
okay, that's
well, that
hilarious.
changes everything.
I thought that was great.
That was really funny. That was really yeah. He's like, yeah, I'm my brain is just in all these machines, and I've just been running Hydra this whole time under everybody's nose with analog, not even digital.
Also, can we talk about how terrifying Hydra is too? So people are working for this organization saying, "Yes, we need to take over the world. People can't be trusted with the world." In order to do that, there's an algorithm and it is set up to murder instantly like tens or I think it was hundreds of thousands or more
Oh yeah,
people
it was
that
yeah,
it was targeting that would prevent them from being able to take over. And I was like, oh my God,
and
this
they
is
didn't even know
so
for sure
terrible.
if they were actually going to be bad. It kind of reminded me of Minority Report with
Yeah.
like precognition, like oh yeah, they're probably going to be bad, so we're just going to go ahead and kill them now. We're going to go ahead and lock them up now. It's like oh,
Yeah. Like at
that's
first they're
not
like,
good.
people like Stark and Bruce Banner, and you're like, oh, okay, okay. Oh, and this like random college or high school student who plays soccer. I don't remember the detail, but it was something ridiculous like that. And then you go, oh,
Yeah,
oh, you guys are going too far.
yeah. It's like oh nope, don't like that. Like it's but yeah, it's one of those things where looking at it, I'm honestly kind of sad that we don't see Hydra anymore because I got to the
Mm,
point where I really enjoyed out of nowhere someone being like, Hell Hydra and just doing
yeah,
something
yeah.
super evil. Because whenever they say that, it's not just like Hell Hydra at Baskin Robbins. It's like they're about to do something super evil.
It's like that politician. He's like, go get me a woman I can sexually assault. Hail
Yeah.
Hydra.
Hell Hydra. Right.
Yeah,
It's
that
like,
that
oh,
creepy one that hates Tony Stark.
yeah.
I don't remember his
Yeah.
name,
And
but I was
yeah,
like,
but
"Of
he
course
was
you're
yeah,
part of
but he was
Hydra."
played by what's Gary Shambling, which rest in peace. But yeah, which because that guy he's normally hilarious in everything he's in, but in that it was like, oh, he's a mean senator that turns out to be
Yep.
Hydra. Of course he is. Like they're
It
not yeah.
yeah, it's definitely very interesting just how woven it was. I agree with you actually because when you brought up Hydra, I had kind of forgotten it existed.
Yeah.
And not because it was so good at
They're
being
good at
underneath
being
the
dormant.
radar, but yeah, but because it was such a really great villain or, group of villains, and yet it didn't fully take off the ground in a lot of ways. Like for
Yeah.
me, it's not as powerful as Spectre. It's not as powerful as some of these other organizations purely because it didn't cross over, I think, enough in different movies and whatnot. And once again, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I did not watch it. That probably would have helped quite a bit in terms
Yeah.
of how I feel about Hydra. But I agree. I would have loved to see Hydra more.
Yeah. And well, and and I think it's one of those things where Steve Rogers has always been like the number one antagonist for Hydra.
Mm,
And so whenever he was around, it was like, oh yeah, they're around too. And so I'm really interested in seeing if um now that Sam Wilson's taking over as Captain
mm,
America, if they're going to do anything at all with Hydra, because we saw Hydra in all the Captain America movies. Cap 1, of course, in The Winter Soldier, obviously Hydra
yep,
was there. But even in Civil War, Zemo was going around killing Hydra
that's true.
agents in order to get information from about the Winter Soldier and like taking out their Hydra super soldiers and all that. And so they were a really I really enjoyed them as Marvel villains because I always like when you're looking at a full population of people and you don't know who to trust,
Yeah,
which is
that part is super fun.
it's really fun, but also I think we've all been in situations like that, right? Like there's so many times when you might start a new job and you're like, oh, who's the backstabber around here? Because everyone's saying different things, and I'm scared to say anything about anybody because I don't know if they're gonna run back and tell them like you there's so many
Mm.
times when you might be somewhere and you don't know who to trust. And that's how it is, like looking and knowing that Hydra's an organization and they're all around you, but you don't know who it is because they're still acting like themselves. You don't ever fully know someone until like they you suddenly find out and it's like, oh wow, I just enjoyed bowling with you. I didn't know you wanted to topple the government. That's horrible, right? Like there's people like I laugh because I think about things like clearly the people that raided the Capitol on January 6th were not as organized as Hydra. But
Mm.
people still went to high school with them and thought that they had it
Yeah.
all together, right? People
Yeah.
still worked with them at their job and were like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, he's a good guy." And then they turn
And
on the TV and they're like, "Oh, I did not know that about him. Wow." Right? It
and
sneaks
and
up on you.
that and that was one of the fallacies with Operation Paperclip and Shield and everything when they were getting these things started is I think that they forgot that humans are complicated. And so that's not to say that you can't bring someone in who comes from somewhere else that you don't necessarily approve of. If
Right.
anything, ideally, Zola would have come in and he would have turned for Shield, right? So I'm not saying that it was predictable by any means, but it it sounds like they were too confident in terms of what about their people would stay true and what was something that might appeal to them to kind of shift. Because yeah, I mean there are different parts of people, and also I think we think of, oh well, someone who lies, who manipulates, who betrays, who would condone violence. We assume there are going to be all of these things that are really obvious in just their everyday to day. We assume it's just going to show constantly. But it's like what you said, you can go somewhere and not be sure who's doing what. And also there I mean there were people who they were still people.
Yeah.
So you can still really enjoy a person and they also are lying to you
Yeah.
and might have a lot of other motives going on that you're not aware of. And that is I think a just constantly a huge struggle for our brains to fully comprehend how these very different things can live within one person.
Yeah. And what's even funnier about Hydra and is that like when you look at it from the Nazi standpoint, they were a radical section of
Mhm.
the Nazis. Like regular Nazis were even like, "Oh, huh, you're not who I thought you were,"
Yep.
which is like that is really saying something. And then they also then infiltrated the US government to like the highest levels. And so
Mhm.
yeah, it very very interesting. But at the same time, it's one of those things I look at where it's like, okay, are you naive to trust people? Or does that just make you a good person that you're still trusting of people, even though you know there's people like that out there, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it's funny cuz so when I did like my last bout of training I had to do, so there like you go through your graduate school and you get a lot of clinical work then, and then you do like a year that's fully clinical stuff to wrap up your degree to be a clinical psychologist. And I remember talking to one of my supervisors and pretty much being like, I need help not just fully believing everything a person tells me. And it wasn't so much like, "Oh, these people are terrible and I've gotta catch them in a lie," or it wasn't that. It was more the fact that people are complicated and you're not just going to get they're not just gonna give you the complete picture of themselves for one reason or another, whether
Right.
they mean it that way or not. And also, there are people that are going to purposefully deceive you. Once again, it's not necessarily meant to hurt you or harm you. It might hurt and harm you, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the intention. Uh, but there are a lot of ways that people might lie and sneak around and manipulate or, try and control a situation. And I always kind of believed everyone was trying to be as truthful and honest and open as possible, but honestly, that's not always the case. There are a lot of reasons that that's not always the case. And I mean, you make a good point. I think it's really nice to believe in the best in people, and also to be able to truly bring out the best in people, we have to be willing to see and acknowledge the worst in people too.
Right. Right. And you have to be, honestly, just willing to trust people. It's one of the things I do like about Captain
Mm,
America, because in whenever you see him, you put him next to people who don't trust anyone. You put him between
yep.
Nick Fury and Black Widow, who just like, I don't even trust the coffee I'm drinking. I don't trust the air I'm breathing. I'm waiting
Yep.
for you to pull off a mask and you're actually Thanos, Steve Rogers. Like, I don't trust anyone. And then on the other side of that is Steve Rogers just like, I just believe in freedom. I don't know what to tell you. Right. But he's cool with these people despite
Mm,
their severe paranoia because of their past experiences.
yeah. Well, and here's what's interesting. So you could argue that he has a naivete that would make him struggle with certain things. And he does struggle with certain things, but it usually has more to do with the decisions that he has to make in a scenario and what actions he might have to take. But in an area where you would think he would struggle more, it was even keel. So you'd think, okay, so Nick Fury, Black Widow, you would assume that they would catch it. They would know something was up. They'd be aware that something was off. And yet here they were doing all of these espionage things themselves, looking for the danger, and they're doing it actually for the very people that they're looking for
Yeah.
without realizing it, right? And so you think that Steve Rogers would be the one with the wool pulled over his eyes, but it's all of them. And so I think that that's something that sometimes people struggle with too, especially like Black Widow. I mean, she was literally born and trained up as a child to be a spy, to not
Right.
trust people. And so a lot of people will get to a point where they don't trust people because of how they were raised and how they were treated,
Hmm.
really terrible things that have happened. There are a lot of really great reasons that people question who and how to trust.
Right.
And by the way, you shouldn't trust everybody because
Yeah.
that's unfortunately just not how the world works. But what can happen is you get to a point where you question so much that you can't trust at all. And you think it's for the better.
Hmm.
You think that, ha, no one's going to hurt me now. No one's going to trick me now. No, none of that stuff's going to happen. But you actually see Black Widow in Winter Soldier struggle with the fact that she thought that she had changed, and then she found out she was amongst the same types of people that she was trying to get away from.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good example that sometimes we fear that if you trust people, it's always going to hurt you. So I really like how they showed, okay, yeah, Steve Rogers trusts people and he got hurt by it cuz here's Hydra. But it happened to Nick Fury, it happened to Black Widow too.
Right.
So, isn't it better to find a way to be able to have some trust and some connections if either way Hydra's gonna happen. If Hydra's gonna happen, I'd rather have a little bit of the Steve Rogers outlook on life.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. Um, Hell Hydra.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.